of the time, the people who enjoy this game the absolute least are the parents or the grandparents, right? It's the reason why some of you work so hard to give the exact same amount towards every child or grandchild, because you don't want those things. And it's interesting, I've asked you this question before when we talked about Christmas stuff, because there's some that you have to do it by like the number of gifts, and some that have to do like dollar amount. And my mom's a dollar amount person. Like every year, everybody gets a check to total it out. Right, my gift costs a little bit less, so I get a check for $26.10, so that make sure that I know that I got the same amount spent on me as everybody else. Like that's how that works. But sometimes we like to kind of think that we're most favored. This week, I got to tease my mother-in-law because she sent out a family group text, and I was on it, but Nicole wasn't, and. So thank you for welcoming me so kindly into your family after all these years. I will let your daughter know what you're trying to pass on. Like some of that stuff is fun. Sometimes, though, it gets to be a little bit of a problem when these factions begin to develop. If that's really, most of the time, like I said, this is harmless fun, but sometimes if you do have a favorite, it's a problem. And sometimes if you actually begin to think you are and you try to say you have an elevated status above somebody else, that's a bit of a problem. And I use all that as a framework for saying this is what you're going to look at a little bit in 1 Corinthians chapters 12, 13, and 14, because they're dealing with some giftedness issues. They receive these gifts from God, and some of them think they got some gifts that make them a little bit more important than everybody else. Or somebody gets a gift and they don't think their gift is as good as somebody else's, it's not as visible, and they think, well, they must not be as important, and it's causing some conflict. And so you got to understand, when you come to chapter 12 in 1 Corinthians, for the next 3 chapters, Paul is going to spend these 3 chapters talking about spiritual gifts. And he's going to mention several, how to use them, and how not to, because these gifts are for the building and the unity of the church. Now, we're going to take a little bit of an overhead view, if you will, as we kind of look holistically at these 3 chapters together. And I'm going to kind of cherry pick and dive down into a couple parts of 12 and 14 today, but understand that they're all kind of connected. And I want you to spend some time these next 3 weeks, next couple of weeks, reading on your own 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 13, and 14. Next week, we will not be here because we will be at meeting with First Baptist Liberty at Ruthmort Park in Liberty. Man, I hope you come. Bring a lawn chair. Have a good time. Let's spend that day together. I would love for you to be a part of that. I think there's some unity involved that is exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about. I hope that you will make it a priority to be there, rain or shine. But as we've known, we haven't seen any rain in quite some time, so it shouldn't, probably not even going to be an issue next Sunday. But I would love for you to be there. But in that kind of, as you prepare for when we get back in 2 weeks, we'll spend some time in chapter 13. So be familiar with that a little bit. It'll help you. It's helpful to understand, though, when we talk about 12, 13, and 14, and even chapter 13, which is probably one of the most famous parts of the Bible. It's a piece of scripture that people who aren't Christian or aren't Bible people know, right? We cherry pick it and we pull it out for weddings. It's the famous love chapter. People quote it all the time. They think it's amazing. But what we forget is that it's part of this discourse about spiritual gifts and how even using our gifts in love matters, right? So I want to drill down into chapter 12, starting in verse 7 right now. Now, to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit, a message of wisdom. To another, a message of knowledge by the means of the same Spirit. To another, faith by the same Spirit. To another, gifts of healing by that one Spirit. To another, miraculous powers. To another, prophecy. To another, distinguishing between the spirits. And to another, speaking in different kinds of tongues. And still to another, the interpretation of tongues. All of these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and He distributes them to each one just as He determines. Now, the first, they list out several of them. None of those lists include everything that's on. Just to mention, these are the ways that